Next, Councilman La Fortune. And Councilman Anthony.
Thank you, Council President. I too want to express my sincere condolences to our beloved sergeant's family, as well as to Councilman Narducci. We all know that the sergeant, he would go above and beyond in his duties, and he truly served all of us on council. So this is a great loss for all of us. And thank you for recognizing him. I also want to thank the commissioner, the chief, FOP President Aymandi. I've had the pleasure of spending time with all of you. Mr. Aymandi, on several occasions, you and I have had coffee. We've talked. Sometimes we agreed on things. Sometimes we did not. Both the chief and the commissioner, I always say that you might get sick of me because we talk almost weekly. I've invited you and the district lieutenant to my community meetings. Pre-pandemic, you've come to my home for dinner with my family and members of the community. I've had the opportunity to go on a couple of ride-alongs with the police department. I've also had an opportunity to go on ride-alongs with the Nonviolence Institute. And Cedric, I am just so happy to see you here and also appreciate the work that the Institute is doing in the community as well. And also all the police officers, the work that they're doing. So I first want to say that I agree with my council colleagues in regards to the state police coming to Providence. One, I think it shows a lack of confidence in Providence ability, our police department or public safety's leadership ability, as well as the members of the police department's ability to address this issue. One thing that Mr. Cedric said was relationships. And we've been having the same conversations about the same issues for quite some time. I also had an opportunity, and even before this meeting, because I reached out to both commissioner and the chief, to look at the data, to look at the trend of violence. And thank you, Councilwoman Miller, for also bringing up the point that, we want to see more data. So when we did have close to 500 police officers, there was the violence rate in the city of Providence was much higher. We also see that there was a downward trend over the course of the years, yet during a global pandemic, we saw an influx of violence. During that time, all of our rec centers were closed. Kids were forced to learn from home, so they weren't going into schools. And in fact, I spoke with teachers. Some kids weren't present during the Zoom meetings. And then when we started transitioning back to the classroom and with the alternative schedules, the older kids, a lot of them weren't coming to school. These classes were empty. We didn't have as many after-school programs or initiatives that were functioning. So gun violence is a public health issue. I talked to Dr. Rainey about this, and she also agreed that it was a public health issue. We have seen an influx of illegal guns, to my council colleagues' point, on the streets. I've testified at the State House. I've been with both the commissioner and the chief testifying at the State House so that we can reduce access to these illegal guns and also have accountability measures put in place at the state level to hold people accountable who purchase these guns so that they don't fall in the wrong hands. There were 13 homicide victims last year. As I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about, since the time I was elected to council in 2017, all the funerals that I have gone to with kids laying in caskets, babies, victims of homicide. Some are adults. I'm thinking about William Parson, how kids, his fellow classmates from both Central and PCTA, and you know what? They had an SRO, watched him die. I think about the young man who was living, I believe was in Newport. He was Dominican. He came to Providence to see his family at the Roger Williams Project, and he was by the door, and the bullet hit him, which wasn't intended for him. And this was a young man who was sending money to the DR to take care of his family. Beautiful, beautiful young man, beautiful. I think about Tatiana Francois, although she didn't live in Providence, she lived in Cranston. Her family church was in Providence. She did a lot in Providence. She was shot and killed in Pawtucket. She was my daughter's Sunday school teacher. All she was doing was sitting in a car talking to her cousin, and she lost her life. I think of Maya. I went to see her family last Monday. I also went to the wake. And I remember talking to her father, and he said, she's right here in the casket, and I still cannot believe it. I think about the young man who was with her, who moved her so afraid that they would come back, and she died in his arms, the trauma that he's experienced. And he shared with me that just last year, he lost his 2-month-old child to MRSA. The impact of violence is severe, it's long-term. And what I'm seeing now is that many people, particularly those of marginalized communities, are so accustomed to seeing it that all emotions are erased. They become desynthesized. I've spoken to the chief about even the impact on police officers. Officer Verdi shared with me how hard it was because he was familiar with the family and how difficult it has to be when you have to go respond to a violent crime. And when you look at the person, the victim, and realize that that person could be your own child. That has to be difficult.
Councilwoman, I just want to remind you.
I understand. I understand. And everyone else, there's a bunch.
No, a second. I just want to ask, if you have some questions, could you please?
I do.
Thank you.
There were many people who had statements before. I just want to also have my fair share.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm trying to be fair to everybody. It's getting late in the hour. We have other councilmen.
We've been here for a long time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just ask if you have a question, please ask.
Thank you, President, but I'm going to finish my statement because we've allowed other people to do so with all due respect. So thank you for that. Because guess what? I know what it feels to lose someone to gun violence. I know what it feels when people don't report it. I know that feeling. Every time I go to these funerals, every time one of these young people, anyone who experienced gun violence, it hurts me deeply. It does. So I understand the time. I have patiently sat here in this poor air quality.
Thank you for this.
So thank you.
You can continue.
Thank you. So just going back to the point is all of the contributing factors, people mentioned it, the lack of investments in our schools are underfunded. Many of our rec centers are closed or falling apart. In fact, I went to the Elmwood Rec Center. No one has invested in it for how many years now? Southside, a couple of years ago, flooded. Billy Taylor, part of it. There's mold. So all of these things contribute to the violence that's happening in our community. So it's not an issue that can be resolved with policing. And also, if we're going to spend our tax dollars, right, we also have to think about a comprehensive strategic approach That includes public safety, the police department, but that also includes community resources. The Nonviolence Institutes, their outreach workers or street workers have reduced significantly over the past few years. There are programs right now like Princess to Kings, which was developed as a prison divergent program. You have Oasis International. You have Pastor Howard Jenkins started the Alternative to Violence program. There's John Hope Settlement, which used to be an entity in the community that would have lock-ins to prevent like feuds between gangs. There are programs that Mr. Santos with the Chad Brown Association that is mentoring our youth. None of them are here. None of them are here. Community policing is about building a relationship with the community. You can have 100 officers on foot, but if they don't know the community that they're serving and everyone is not working to cultivate those relationships, if a crime happens, people are not going to report. People are not going to engage. What's missing here? It's the comprehensive strategic approach to addressing the violence in our city. I'm hearing that you're asking for more resource, but no one's telling us how those resources are going to be used. We're calling in the state police, but yet you haven't told us what are some things that's going to be done to address the ATVs. We've been talking about that for how long now? I too am tired of seeing the violence. Providence is my hometown. My parents have been in the same house for 30 years. So I will always choose Providence. And I feel safe because this is my home. My home. But I also don't want to fear standing outside and someone pulling a gun at me. So what I want to hear, what I want to see is what are you going to do to increase accountability and transparency as part of building those relationships? How are you going to work with the community-based organizations that are actually doing the work in the community with limited resources? How are we going to cultivate that so that everyone feels a part? Because public safety has a key word, the public, which means it's all of our responsibility. And I do apologize for taking a bit of time. I grew up,
Councilwoman, you have 1 more minute. And then
Thank you.
I have the next council person.
I grew up on the south side of Providence in Washington Park. I come from a working class family. My father at 73 years old is still a certified nursing assistant. There might be people here, my dad took care of your family members. I've seen crime. I've witnessed it. I shouldn't be here today. I shouldn't. So what I do hope is that we take that strategic approach. And yes, support public safety, but also support and invest in our neighborhoods, in our community, because that's how you're going to address the problem. And I do hope that you can share the data and information that I requested.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Next.